I used to think there was nothing worse than being ignored by your own family. But I was wrong. There is something worse, being noticed only when they need something from you. My name is Brielle Carter. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a logistic assistant in Chicago. If you saw me sitting at that dinner table that night, hands folded, shoulders tight, eyes on the candlelight instead of their faces, you might have thought I was shy or polite, or maybe just tired. The truth was simpler. I was bracing for the impact of another night with people who never saw me unless I was giving. And still, I tried. I had spent weeks planning the gift, a luxury trip for my entire family, first-class flights, villa, private chef, quiet beaches. It was ridiculous generosity, yes, but it was also my last attempt to stitch something back together. Some families heal through conversation. Mine, I thought, might heal through shared experience. But when I handed them the envelopes that night, something inside me already sensed the wrongness in the room. A subtle shift, a quiet smirk, the familiar tightening in my chest. My mother opened hers first. My father leaned over her shoulder. My siblings exchanged a look I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. The one that said, "This should be fun." Then my father laughed. A slow, measured exhale of contempt. "So, you're still trying to buy our love, aren't you?" My mother added, "Honestly, Brielle, no one in this family actually likes you. You make everything awkward. Why do you keep forcing yourself on us?" The world didn't fall apart. It didn't shatter. It just paused. A moment of cold clarity washed through me, like stepping into winter air after being indoors too long. Their voices blurred, but their words stayed sharp, etched into the space between us. I remember standing, not angrily, not dramatically, just quietly. I left them envelopes on the table. I left them with their mocking. And I walked out of the restaurant with my pulse steady and my breath surprisingly calm. Because something shifted that night. I finally understood that my silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. And they had no idea what they had just set in motion. Now, stay with me because this is where everything starts to change. Let me ask you something. What would you do if the people you loved most told you they never wanted you at all? Would you break, or would you rise and prioritize yourself? Share your honest opinion in the comments. Truly want to hear your perspective. Here at Revenge Bible, we explore real psychological stories of betrayal and justice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss our next emotional reckoning. Before that dinner, before the envelopes and the laughter that felt like knives, my life wasn't perfect, but it had a rhythm that made sense to me. I woke up early, always before the sun, because something about quiet mornings helped me feel capable, even when the rest of my world didn't agree. My apartment was small, tucked above a bakery that smelled like warm bread and powdered sugar, and most days that scent felt like a reminder that sweetness still existed somewhere. But even then, even in the middle of small comforts, there was always a shadow I couldn't name. A heaviness I carried because I knew deep down that I had no real place where I was wanted unconditionally. Isn't that a terrible thing to realize? That the people who raised you can look at you and still not see you?
I grew up in a house where emotions were treated like weaknesses and silence was currency. If you were quiet, you survived. If you needed something, you were a problem. I learned early to shrink myself, to make room for their voices, their moods, their expectations. I got good at disappearing in plain sight. Almost too good, and sometimes I wonder, what part of me did I lose in the process of trying so hard to be easy to love? My job helped me forget, at least for a few hours each day. Logistics sounds boring to most people, but to me it was a kind of refuge. There was order. There were rules. Packages went where they were supposed to go. Problems had solutions. Unlike in my family, nothing exploded out of nowhere. But even the comfort of structure couldn't completely erase the ache of going home to unanswered messages, canceled plans, and family group chats I was mysteriously left out of. Sometimes I ask myself why I kept trying, why I kept reaching out, showing up, giving more than I had. Was I chasing approval, or was I just afraid of what it would mean to finally stop caring? The truth is, loneliness makes you hold on to people who hurt you because the alternative, being completely alone, feels like a silence you're not sure you can survive. My parents weren't always cruel. Or maybe they were, and I was just too young to understand the shape their cruelty took. It wasn't yelling or hitting or anything loud. It was quieter. Disapproval hidden in sighs, affection rationed out like scarce food, love given only when I proved myself useful. They praised me when I overachieved. They dismissed me when I failed. And deep inside, I kept asking, what would it take to be enough for them?
Most weekends, I visited, even when they didn't ask me to. I brought groceries, helped clean, fixed whatever was broken. Not because they needed me, but because doing things for them made me feel like I belonged in their world, like I wasn't just a quiet afterthought. But every visit carried the same outcome: polite smiles, shallow questions, conversations that circled around everything except anything meaningful. I left each time feeling guilty for wanting more than they were willing to give. It's strange looking back, realizing how much of my life revolved around trying to earn something that should have been freely given. I didn't want luxury or praise. I just wanted to feel wanted, to feel chosen. Don't we all want that? Don't we all want to believe that the people who know us best will love us anyway? That was the version of me that walked into the restaurant on the night everything changed. A version still clinging to hope, still trying to prove that I was worth loving. I wore my nicest dress, the one I saved for rare occasions. I told myself this time would be different. This time they would see me. But hope without evidence is just self-inflicted heartbreak. And deep down, some part of me already knew how that night would end. And maybe that's the saddest part. Not the betrayal itself, but the fact that I expected it. I walked in carrying love, and they met me with emptiness. I walked in offering connection, and they answered with mockery. Looking back now, I wonder, why did I keep handing my heart to people who handled it like something disposable? I wasn't naive. I was conditioned to believe that if I worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, or sacrificed quietly enough, maybe one day they would look at me with the softness I had seen them give so easily to others. I used to sit in my car before visiting them, rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining laughter, imagining warmth. But reality always felt colder.
They talked over me, around me, through me, never to me. And each time I drove home afterward, I felt a little emptier, like pieces of who I was were being scraped away bit by bit. Have you ever felt that kind of slow erosion? The kind where you don't notice the damage until suddenly you're standing in front of a mirror, wondering when your own reflection began to look like a stranger? That's who I was before that night. A woman holding herself together with threads of hope that were already fraying. A woman who didn't understand that walking away would be the beginning of everything she had been searching for. And I stayed.
That night at the restaurant didn't end when I walked out. That was only the visible part of the wound, the cut you can point to. But betrayal rarely begins with the moment that breaks you. It begins long before, in the small cracks you learn to ignore. And looking back now, I realize that everything leading up to that dinner was part of a larger pattern I refused to see. In the weeks before it happened, I had been trying harder than usual. I don't know why. Maybe birthdays approaching, maybe the quiet dread that comes from realizing you're drifting farther from people you're supposed to be close to. Maybe I just wanted one moment where my family felt like family. Something simple, something warm, something I could hold on to when life felt heavy. So I planned the trip. Not impulsively, not extravagantly for the sake of pride. I planned it because I thought that if we had just one peaceful week together, sun, air, ocean, no distractions, maybe the distance between us would finally shrink. I imagined my mother smiling at me, not through me, my father having a real conversation instead of criticizing my choices, my siblings laughing with me instead of at me. I imagined us living in the same world for once. But the betrayal didn't begin at the table. It began earlier, when I told them we should have dinner together, my treat. You would think that invitation alone might spark something positive. Instead, my mother sighed, my father asked if it was necessary, and my sister texted me, "Make sure it isn't someplace boring." I knew their tone, I knew their lack of enthusiasm, but I still tried. That night, I arrived early. I chose the table. I asked for soft lighting because I wanted it to feel calm. I even rehearsed what I would say when I handed them the envelopes. Something grateful, something hopeful. But the moment they walked in, I felt the temperature shift. My mother didn't hug me. My father didn't make eye contact. My siblings sat down like they were fulfilling an obligation, not joining a family dinner. I should have left then, but I stayed. We ordered food, small talk, empty talk, meaningless details. And then when the plates were half finished, I slid the envelopes forward. I didn't do it dramatically. I didn't smile too big or make a speech. I just said quietly, I wanted to do something for all of us, something we could enjoy together. My mother opened hers first. I watched her face flatten, then twist. My father leaned over, reading the itinerary like it was some kind of insult. My siblings exchanged a grin they didn't bother to hide. Then my father said the sentence that would become the defining fracture in my life. "You're still trying to buy our love, aren't you?" My heart didn't just drop, it folded. My mother added, "Honestly, Brielle, no one in this family actually likes you. We tolerate you, but you make everything uncomfortable." There it was, the truth I had always feared, said aloud like a casual fact. My siblings nodded. They didn't defend me. They didn't soften it. They didn't even pretend to disagree. They just let the words hang there, heavy
and cutting. My voice wouldn't come. My throat tightened, my hands trembled slightly under the table. I stared at them, not because I didn't understand, but because I finally did. Everything made sense. Every distant tone, every subtle rejection, every moment I had poured myself into a void, hoping something might echo back. My father pushed the envelope away, like it irritated him. He said, "We don't need your guilt trips. You always try too hard. It's embarrassing." My mother folded her arms. "You're desperate, Brielle. You always have been." I think the worst part was the way they said it so calmly, as if they were discussing the weather, not slicing through my last bit of hope. I remember the room spinning slightly. I remember feeling weightless, like nothing in my body was holding me together anymore. I stood up. Not in anger, not in theatrical heartbreak. I stood up because staying seated felt like drowning. My chair didn't scrape loudly. My steps didn't echo. I simply placed my napkin down, turned away from them, and walked out into the cold air. But the betrayal wasn't complete yet.
2 days later, my sister posted a group photo of the family at brunch, with a caption that stung more deeply than any sentence spoken that night. Family Day. We don't need expensive trips to feel connected. I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't mentioned. I wasn't part of the day. They erased me before I had time to process the wound. And that was the moment, the exact moment when the betrayal crystallized into something else. Not rage, not vengeance. Something quieter, something clearer. A decision. If they wanted a world without me, I would give them exactly that, but not in the way they expected. Their words didn't just break something inside of me. They revealed something. They revealed the truth of who they were, and they revealed the truth of who I needed to become. I never expected that a simple walk through the family home would change everything. Weeks after the dinner, the one where their words cut deeper than I thought possible, they kept calling, texting, leaving messages full of half-hearted apologies and excuses, but I wasn't interested anymore. My heart had already withdrawn, my mind already calculating. And yet that day I felt a pull to revisit the one place that held both memories and secrets, my grandmother's old house. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Dust motes floated in streams of afternoon sunlight, painting the air golden. I ran my fingers over the wooden banister, tracing grooves worn by generations before me. Each creak of the floorboards under my feet echoed like a whispered memory. My eyes fell on the large oak desk in the study, a desk I had spent hours writing letters to relatives on, long before I realized they never read them with sincerity. I opened the drawers methodically, filing cabinets, stacks of old ledgers, and faded folders lined the shelves. My hands shook slightly, but not from fear. Something inside me told me that truth was close, that if I looked carefully, I would find it. And I did. A folder tucked behind a row of tax documents caught my attention. It was simply labeled Brielle, Property Records. My pulse quickened. How had I missed this before? I pulled it out, flipping the top page with reverence and disbelief. There it was, the proof I had never been shown. A legal document naming me as the sole heir to the family home.
a property my parents had quietly transferred into their own names years ago. My hands trembled as I read through the pages. Deeds, signatures, notarizations, and property tax receipts all pointed to the same fact. The house had belonged to me, legally, from the moment my grandmother passed. I sank into the chair, letting the folder rest on my lap. My chest tightened. I couldn't believe it. How could they keep this from me? How could they look me in the eye, mocking every gesture of generosity, while simultaneously stealing what was mine? I pressed my mouth to stifle a sob. Was this what betrayal felt like? Silent, meticulous, almost surgical? I reread every page carefully, noting the discrepancies, the dates, the way my parents had circumvented my inheritance. They had forged signatures, misfiled documents, and quietly erased me from the records. Every line I read felt heavier than the last. It wasn't just money or property, it was recognition, legitimacy, a right that had been mine by law and by love. And they had stripped it from me with cold precision. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the documents. I asked myself questions aloud, not expecting answers. How could they do this? Was I really so invisible to them? Did they even care what my life would become once they erased my claim? The air in the study felt heavy, as if the house itself knew the injustice that had been done. But amidst the anger and shock, clarity began to settle in. This wasn't just about losing a house. This was about power, about control, about the audacity of people who believed that they could dictate the end of my story. My heart slowed. My breathing deepened. And for the first time since that dinner, I felt a strange calm. I pulled out my journal, the one I kept meticulously organized, with color-coded entries. I began writing, documenting every discovery, the hidden folder, the deeds, the altered signatures, the dates. Every sentence I wrote reinforced a growing realization I now had the power. Proof wasn't just evidence, it was leverage. My parents had assumed that I would react with panic or despair. They had miscalculated entirely. As I closed the journal, I looked around the room. The study that had been both a sanctuary and a trap for memories. I could see my grandmother's influence everywhere, the sturdy furniture, the framed photographs, the meticulous organization. She had trusted me, planned for me, and in her absence, my parents had tried to rewrite her intentions. But now, with the truth in my hands, I felt something else. Justice was within reach. And it would not come from anger alone. I rose, standing tall, despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. For the first time, I understood that revenge didn't have to be loud or messy. It could be quiet, deliberate, and inevitable. My discovery was not just the revelation of stolen property. It was the first step toward reclaiming my life. I whispered to myself, almost reverently, "You thought I wouldn't see. You thought I would let it go. You were wrong. Every choice I make from this point forward will be mine and mine alone." The study was still. The sun had shifted in the sky, casting long shadows across the floor. For the first time in weeks, I felt my mind clear, my purpose sharpen. They had underestimated me for too long. Now I knew exactly what I needed to do. And as I left the house, folder clutched tightly to my chest, I realized something profound. Betrayal had shown me the path. It had revealed not just the theft of a home, but the depth of their greed and the magnitude of my own strength. I would not just reclaim what was mine. I would do it in a way that left no doubt. Their arrogance had awakened something unstoppable inside me. The moment I walked out of my grandmother's house with that folder in my hands,
Something inside me shifted. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was awake. Fully, sharply awake in a way I hadn't been in years. The truth wasn't a burden. It was a blueprint. And once I realized that, a quiet determination began to form inside me. Revenge didn't need to be loud or violent. It didn't need screaming matches or slammed doors. It needed strategy, precision, timing, and above all, patience. That night, I spread everything out across my dining table. Deeds, signatures, letters, and tax receipts. I sat with my journal open, color-coded cabs ready, and a blank page waiting to absorb my thoughts. I wrote the word plan at the top in bold blue ink. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then slowly, the first step became clear. I needed allies. Not friends who would offer empty sympathy or people who loved drama. No, I needed individuals who understood truth, who valued evidence, who knew the weight of silence. So I made 3 calls. 3 people who would shape everything that followed. The first was to Dr. Keisha Miles, my therapist. She had been gently nudging me for months to step back from my family, to see the emotional patterns for what they were. But I always resisted. I didn't want to believe that blood could hurt me intentionally. When I told her what I'd found, she didn't express shock. Instead, she said something that stuck with me. Brielle, sometimes your healing begins the moment their mask finally falls. She helped me outline the emotional boundaries I would need to maintain, so I wouldn't fall into old patterns. She reminded me that revenge should never cost me my own peace, and she helped me prepare for the psychological warfare that comes when narcissistic people realize they're losing control. The second call was to Mr. Harlan. He was my late grandmother's neighbor, a gentle man with a sharp memory and a soft voice. When I told him I had discovered the folder, he sighed deeply. Your grandmother knew this might happen. She told me more than once that she feared your parents would try to take the house from you. He invited me over the next afternoon, and when I arrived, he was already at the table with old photographs, dated letters, and a small box my grandmother had left in his care. Inside were handwritten notes, conversations she'd logged, worries she had documented, and her personal appeal to protect my granddaughter's inheritance if anything goes wrong. The box made my throat tighten. My grandmother knew. She had seen the greed long before I did, and she had quietly prepared evidence I didn't even know existed. I thanked Mr. Harlan with tears in my eyes, and he squeezed my hand gently. Justice has a way of circling back, even when people think they've outrun it. The third call was to attorney Nora Vega, a young but razor-sharp attorney known for her meticulous approach to family estate cases. When I emailed her the initial documents, she responded within an hour. This is serious, and you have a strong case. We need to proceed carefully. Meeting her in person solidified my confidence. She didn't mince words. She explained how my parents had illegally transferred property, how they bypassed probate, and how several signatures looked suspiciously inconsistent. She outlined my legal rights, what could be reversed, and what consequences my family could face. But then she asked me something unexpected. How do you want this to end? Legally or emotionally? What outcome do you really want? I didn't answer immediately. I sat there, breathing slowly, weighing my options. Then I finally said, I want them to understand what they did. I want them to feel the consequences, not through chaos, but through truth. I want them to see that I'm not the weak one they thought I was. She nodded. Then we move quietly. We gather everything.
We build a case so airtight that the truth speaks louder than any confrontation. That became the foundation of my plan.
Over the next weeks, I documented everything. Journal entries, voicemails they left begging me to call back, screenshots of messages, photos of documents, copies of every inheritance paper, statements from Mr. Harlan, even old birthday cards from my grandmother mentioning the house she hoped I'd grow into. Every night I worked in silence, surrounded by folders and sticky notes. My apartment felt like a personal war room, calm, organized, methodical. With every detail I added, the anger inside me simmered into focus. I wasn't acting out of rage anymore. I was acting out of clarity. I didn't answer a single call from my family, not out of spite, out of strategy. Silence is powerful when people expect you to beg for their attention, and my silence terrified them. Ava sent messages saying she didn't mean it. Lucas claimed he barely knew what was happening. My mother sent essays trying to guilt trip me into coming home. My father tried to act authoritative at first, then slowly softened into desperation. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I let their words pile up, untouched, becoming part of the growing file I kept documenting. Their panic spoke volumes. They weren't worried about losing me. They were worried about losing control, losing access, losing leverage, and eventually losing the house. The final step in my plan came the night I listened to the last voicemail my mother left, one where she sounded irritated rather than remorseful. "Brielle, this is getting ridiculous. Just call us so we can fix this. You're being dramatic." I pressed save and added it to the folder. Then I sat down in front of my journal and wrote the final line of my preparation. I'm ready. My plan wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, it was precise, steady, and inevitable. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for love or permission. I was preparing for justice. And deep down, I knew they had no idea what was coming.
I never imagined that confronting my family would feel so quiet. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, no dramatic accusations. I had spent weeks preparing, and now the time had come to execute my plan with the precision I had honed so carefully. This wasn't about yelling or chaos or revenge in the way the movies show it. This was about exposing truth so undeniable, so meticulous, that it would speak louder than anything my family could ever claim. I arrived at the attorney's office early that morning. Nora Vega greeted me with a nod, her eyes steady. The folder I had built over the past weeks rested on the table between us, thick with deeds, tax receipts, journal entries, voicemails, and statements from Mr. Harlan. It felt heavier than any weight I had carried before. Not heavy with burden, but heavy with inevitability. I said, "This is everything. They can't deny a single page. They've been lying for 10 years, and now it all comes out." Nora smiled slightly. "Good. They won't see it coming. Not until it's too late." We began by sending a formal attorney notice to my parents, clearly outlining my claim to the $420,000 property. The letter was concise, professional, and devastatingly firm. It detailed the original will, the legal transfer, and the evidence of their unauthorized misdistribution of the property. Every line was backed by proof: my grandmother's handwritten notes, Mr. Harlan's statements, notarized records, and my journal entries documenting my research.
I did not expect gratitude. I did not expect tears. I did not expect apologies. I expected panic, and that's exactly what followed. Within hours, my phone began to ring. I didn't answer. Text messages piled up, frantic, pleading, each one revealing their fear and desperation. My parents tried guilt, manipulation, even bribes, offering money, vacations, promises to fix everything if I would just forgive them. I let the messages sit. I read them once, then archived them into the case folder. Every desperate attempt became evidence of their own recklessness and entitlement. Their panic was palpable, almost cinematic in its quiet way. I could hear their anxiety in every voicemail, see it in every text, feel it in every delayed email. The next step was the meeting with Nora and Mr. Harlan to finalize the documentation for the legal claim. I presented everything as if it were routine, calmly, methodically, deliberately. Nora reviewed each piece, confirming that everything was airtight. Mr. Harlan added context, recounting stories my grandmother had shared with him, all validating my rightful claim. Every word he spoke became another layer of inevitability. When the official notice finally arrived at my parents' home, it was deliberate and controlled. There was no confrontation on my part, no in-person argument, just the truth, delivered in writing, backed by proof. Within the next 24 hours, their panic escalated. My mother called repeatedly, her voice trembling with fear, masked by faux authority. My father left terse, clipped voicemails attempting to assert control. Ava and Lucas sent frantic messages pleading for negotiation. I did not respond to a single one. I didn't need to. The proof was self-explanatory. Their greed, their deceit, their underestimation of me, all of it lay exposed in black and white. They couldn't argue with the notarized deeds, the dated tax records, the journal entries, and the eyewitness account from Mr. Harlan. Every attempt to justify their theft collapsed under the weight of truth. When I finally received their first indirect acknowledgement, my attorney's confirmation that my parents were contacting her on their own, it felt surreal. They were trying to negotiate, to mitigate, to undo the consequences of 10 years of lies. I didn't answer. I didn't intervene. I allowed their own guilt and fear to dictate their actions, letting them dig themselves deeper with each misstep. Over the next week, the legal process advanced with careful deliberation. I stayed composed, calm, and meticulously organized. Each meeting, each submission, each signature I collected reinforced my power. I wasn't angry. I was simply present, documenting, guiding, and letting the system move the way it was meant to move. I watched as their self-assurance crumbled quietly under the weight of the evidence. I remember the moment most vividly. The day the family realized that losing me wasn't a threat, it was inevitable. My parents had convened in private, trying to strategize, attempting to coerce Ava and Lucas into pressuring me. But every tactic failed. Each conversation, each argument they had amongst themselves revealed more of their own mistakes. They had underestimated me, assumed my silence meant weakness, assumed my absence meant surrender. They were wrong on every count. In those quiet moments, I reflected on what I had learned. Revenge is not loud. It doesn't need spectacle. The most effective revenge is patient, calculated, and moral. It doesn't destroy people physically. It shows them their own reflection, forcing them to face the consequences of their choices. And that is exactly what my plan accomplished. By the end of the week, everything was official. The property reverted to my name. My parents had no legal recourse. Ava and Lucas could no longer claim entitlement. Their calls and messages slowed, then stopped entirely. I had executed my revenge with precision, with patience, and with dignity. I remember sitting alone that evening, the city lights out my window casting a soft glow across my apartment. For the first time since that family dinner, I felt complete calm. Not triumph in the cruel sense, but a deep, quiet satisfaction that comes from restoring justice. I hadn't raised my voice, I hadn't acted impulsively, I hadn't sacrificed my own peace for momentary satisfaction. I had waited, prepared, and executed. And the most important realization settled in slowly, like sunlight over a darkened room. This wasn't just revenge, it was self-respect. It was clarity. It was the quiet, powerful statement that I would no longer be underestimated, ignored, or manipulated. They had taken for granted the kindness that had defined me for so long. Now, they were forced to confront the reality of my strength. And in that silence, I finally understood I had won.
When the dust settled and the call stopped, I finally allowed myself to breathe. For so long, I had carried the weight of their judgment, their cruelty, their constant belittlement. I believed for years that their words defined me, that their rejection was my reality. But betrayal is not the end. Not ever. It is a painful mirror, yes, but one that reflects not just your wounds, but your power. I learned that the moment I chose to act deliberately, with clarity and patience. The days after the legal confirmation of my inheritance were quiet but transformative. I didn't celebrate with fanfare. I didn't rub it in. I simply lived in the knowledge that truth had prevailed. I realized that revenge, true, measured revenge, is not about anger or malice. It is about reclaiming yourself. It is about turning betrayal into fuel, using the pain to sharpen your focus, to define boundaries, to reinforce your self-worth. I started to notice subtle changes in myself. My confidence was no longer tentative. My voice, once apologetic, now carried calm authority. Each step I took, each decision I made was rooted in clarity, not fear. I journaled daily, reflecting on every lesson the betrayal had taught me, acknowledging my emotions without letting them control me. The same journal that had once been my refuge from sadness now became my blueprint for growth and strategy. I thought often about my family. I thought about the time lost, the words that hurt, and the love I had longed for, but never received. And I understood that their opinions, their judgments, and their manipulations could no longer define my story. The end of my suffering wasn't dictated by them. The end of my narrative wasn't theirs to write. I was the author. I always had been. If you are watching this and feeling like betrayal has closed doors in your life, know this. You can come back from anything. Your worth is not measured by those who fail to recognize it. Their rejection is not a verdict. It is an invitation to reclaim your power, to redirect your energy, and to emerge stronger than ever. Use the pain. Let it teach you. Let it sharpen your instincts and deepen your clarity. Revenge, measured, quiet, deliberate, is a tool not for destruction, but for self-restoration. For me,
That restoration led to a new chapter entirely. I rebuilt connections with people who genuinely cared, strengthened my own independence, and allowed myself to dream again without hesitation. I moved into the house that had been rightfully mine all along, and every corner became a reminder that patience and integrity always triumph over manipulation. My name is Brielle Carter, redefined and now reclaiming myself. And as I reflect on this experience, I realized I am resilient, I am wise, I am unshakable. I know that no betrayal defines me, no oppressor controls me, and no moment of humiliation dictates my future. My comeback is not about vindication. It is about thriving, about living fully, and about knowing that your own strength will always outlast cruelty. If you are carrying pain today, remember this. Your story isn't over. The ones who tried to diminish you are not the authors of your ending. You are. Like Molly, you can rise, reclaim, and transform every wound into the quiet, undeniable power that guides you forward. Here at Revenge Bible, we turn pain into purpose and betrayal into balance. Subscribe and join us for the next transformation.